right, everybody. I appreciate it's later in the day today. We had a lot of great presentations. So I'll try to keep my presentation a bit visual at first, and then we will dive into some of the tech that's powering the interactive experiences that we deliver. So starting off, we've been working to deliver interactive experiences, and we do that for some of the largest leagues and broadcasters and sports in the world. It is about engaging the fans, so we can deliver layers and layers of content on top of the live streaming experience. We're looking to give them live stats, to give them voting, to show additional value, basically, on top of the streaming that everybody's invested heavily in. In the US market, showing live odds and betting is super important. So we have a lot of customers who are looking to drive value in terms of how can we keep the users longer, how can we deliver new ad formats as part of the graphical content, and how can we measure that we're having an impact on the streaming service. So that's really the essence of what it's about. And then obviously all sports are different. So some sports have a lot of action and really high-paced. But the bottom line is that when you give proper content to the users, you have a massive impact in how long they're watching the streams and how much they're engaging with the content. We obviously want to be cautious of kind of bringing too much content to the screen as well. So you got to respect that. You want to be able to have an experience where, the streaming experience is really the core. So by adding additional content on top, bringing that to all the devices, the users can choose if they want to go deeply into the content or if they just want to watch TV like they always have. If we look at some of the research you'll find out there, there's tons of research on these topics. The bottom line is that users are craving more content. They will leave your streaming service to go to a website to look at the score. The issue sometimes is they're getting the score before it actually happens in the stream. Nobody likes spoilers, so that's the big one of the things that we get asked a lot about. And you have so many sources of content that are interesting to the end users, and kind of how can we bring all that together and be able to serve it to the users. Obviously, the younger the audience is, the more they interact, but the interaction rates are actually really, really high. So a general thing we see is that you're typically getting around half your audience, plus minus, to interact with the content. It depends what kind of content it is. A great user experience is the one that kind of gives you a lot of value, but it doesn't demand a lot from you as an end user. So if it's easy to participate in the content, then typically if you're putting a poll on the screen, it has a really nice impact in the sense that maybe you get 60, 70, 80% of the audience choosing to respond to the question that you're putting up as part of the graphics. So that's a really high engagement rate if you compare it to our old traditional text messages, where you might be doing text messaging for getting polls and results. So all of this data obviously can be so many different sources. And we're kind of just scratching the surface in many ways in terms of how you incorporate the different things. So we've done a lot around live stats, which is typically the content that comes into the broadcast when you're doing traditional broadcast graphics. Same data we're ingesting through the cloud and using that data to automatically power an interactive experience. And the interactive experience should be an extension of what's going on in the broadcast. You can't fit everything into the broadcast, but if we can give you layers of additional information, imagine how much information you're sitting on that you're not able to properly utilize. And that's even the case when we give the users tons of stuff to navigate. We still have more data that we could have shown them. So it's a selection at the end of the day. But interactivity and content that you can present, a part of the stream or top of the stream, definitely is super wide, and it keeps expanding. So if we look at different modes that the users have, sometimes you just want to relax and kind of kick back, typically when you're watching the big screen TV. A lot of customers will have maybe 10 times longer viewing duration times on the connected TVs. So our customers will start with web and mobile typically first, but then they quickly want to get across the connected TVs too. Obviously, the goal is to reach all of your users, no matter where they are, but you can deliver different types of experiences with different screens. So a lean-back experience is more like you're setting your mode. You're figuring out which mode do you want to be in now. Is it the betting mode? Is it the live stats mode? Is it my home team mode that you can quickly go and kind of configure your own view? And we definitely try to be respectful in terms of the broadcast graphics that are already in the stream. Obviously, you could do this on a clean stream, but in 99% of the cases, it's done on a dirty feed. So that means that we're adding content to it. We're trying to take some of the look and feel of the broadcast graphics. And in that case, it helps that we did a lot of broadcast graphics in our previous lives in previous companies, from Olympics to Premier League and also the types of content we did for broadcasters around the Nordics. So that's a good principle. You should be able to watch TV like you always have, but you should also be able to go deeper into the content. So lean back, obviously, to get across the connected TVs, there's always some challenges. I'll get back to that in the tech part of the presentation. But obviously, kind of how quick are those devices to process the things you want to display is always a core challenge. Let's see here. So if you're leaning more into the experiences, that's typically more touch devices or desktop, that's usually the starting point. And it's super quick to be able to kind of click the things you want and get deeper into the content. But then you should never be further away than one click to go back to the stream. So if you click in the middle of the screen, you just minimize everything, and you're back to the game action. So obviously, you're seeing patterns where users are navigating quite frequently, but then also they need to be able to keep their eye on the action of the game, right? So it's always that balance that you're trying to strike. We also output content from our system to second screen devices as well. What's interesting about this is to bring a lot of the live stats and different features to a standalone mobile experience. You could synchronize it to the connected TV if you have a kind of an application running there as well. We can pick up the timing information there and then drive the phone to be accurate in terms of synchronizing the content to the stream. So quite often you're getting all sorts of applications for stats. They've got a different delay than your streaming service or anybody's streaming service. It never adds up, right? So that's one of the things that get done quite a lot. And to drive traffic in it is typically a QR code in the broadcast to kind of drive traffic into a landing page or as part of a native application where this is embedded. You can do many different variations of it. We mainly work within sports for the kind of the STSWE25 application, but we're also looking at entertainment, how a lot of the engagement concepts here are just as easily applied to entertainment content. So I'll show you a little bit about a project we're working on currently, looking at. So if you're doing voting and all sorts of things, all those principles apply. The same applies with the second screen again. That you could bring some of the action you want to execute quickly, you can bring that to a second screen. That also, again, follows the broadcast. So if it's live, or it's VOD, or it's a live-on-tape type of production, it doesn't really matter. It's all data on a timeline that we're trying to tie together to bring value to the users. If we jump a little bit to the technical side, how does this all tie together? How does it integrate with existing players, with existing streaming services? And this is a typical setup. At the bottom here, you see it says clean feed. It can also be a dirty feed. So we show both scenarios. But essentially what we got is a web view sitting on top of a video player as part of an SDK. And that web view has a communication with the video player, so we know what the video player is doing. The web view can fetch any content from the cloud and will always have the latest version. So if I make a change to the content, I basically can make a box yellow, hit publish, and will instantly be out for everybody around the world. So I'm not waiting for the app stores after the initial update to get it enabled. I can publish content to this window at any time and dynamically and data-driven. If we look at some of the components that go into that type of setup, a typical question always is, how do you synchronize to the stream? And for all of you guys working in the streaming part and kind of understanding time codes, yes, we do pick up the time codes from the stream. That's typically the job of the video player. It's passed on to the SDK. The SDK gets some graphics from the cloud. We know which program should we be showing now for this live game that goes at 7 o'clock. So all that, we've kind of ingested the data automatically. We already know what's going to happen in the game before you see it. So there's typically a video delay as part of this. In our case, we're using that as an advantage to process the data that we need. Not that we need a lot of time to do that, half a second, but it's quite useful in that case. The same goes for if you have a web technology layer, you want to be able to communicate with the application beneath. So typically there's a structure to communicate with the video player. Are we playing? Are we pausing? Are we seeking? Are we in full screen? Should we stop? Did the user just jump to 17 minutes? What do we show now? So everything in our system is revolving around timing, probably more than most other systems. So picture that you have a massive playlist of all sorts of content that you want to display, and you're sitting there, you're waiting for the video stream to get to that moment where you want to fire off a certain trigger to drive a certain type of valuable graphic. So this setup then obviously has a set of SDKs that go onto different devices. So I'll get back to that in a sec, but that's kind of the gist of distributing it. When you get to the cloud, there's a lot of WebSockets going on and CDNs. And basically, the question is it one-directional? Is it bidirectional? What do we need to do with the data to be able to scale it? Because essentially, you want to be able to scale it to a really large audience. This is typically what kind of that streaming setup then looks like. You have kind of the stream at the bottom, and you have a video delay in the beginning. We've got customers who got 5 seconds of delay, but you probably have more customers who have 30 seconds of delay, or 40, or 20. So typically, we have to kind of cater for that. And we're connecting to then like stats perform, Opta data, and sport radar data, TDI for tennis. It can be sport tech for Bundesliga type of stuff. It can be, there's so many different data providers. So all of that gets ingested in the cloud, and our job is to make sure that all these things align. If you want to trigger an advertisement from a game moment, every time there's a goal, we can trigger a client-side ad, and so on. So it can be quite daunting in many cases that you're trying to utilize all these layers of data. The trick is to have a kind of a system in the cloud where you can process this, because if you send it all down to the client, those APIs weren't made for that, right? Data providers' APIs are not meant to scale to end users. So you need to have kind of a way of processing it, and then also to scale it all at the end. This is kind of what we're using to create the experiences. So for all the stuff you saw in the beginning, I'll show a bit more later. A lot of the experiences could be created, maybe by 1 or 2 designers. And then we're talking creating something that's actually pretty complex when you're looking at the data structure of, say, baseball or football or basketball. To be able to build an importer for that data in a visual tool, and also to be able to create the experiences so they output as HTML5 or as native components for certain devices. So Live Studio, it reminds you of a traditional graphics editor, but it's actually building small real-time applications on the fly. And whatever we think of designing here automatically becomes a CMS. So a designer can go nuts to create 14 different text fields. Well, that will give you 14 different text fields when you operate in the content afterwards. So from the same system then, we're creating all these kind of experiences. And typically you have the live stats experience as the foundation. But then they want to start doing promotions. So for example, the Yankees have done tons of promotions as part of the content. And what's interesting about that is, you can do advertisement in a traditional sense and show that client side. But also incorporating brands into your content is a pretty cool way of making advertisement more interesting for the audiences, as opposed to annoying, right? Because nobody at the end of the day really likes ads, right? So, whenever we're building an experience like this type of expansion could be done, in a matter of minutes and hours, tested the same day, launched the next day, right? So if you can get faster kind of to the market with new features, chances are you're going to be building quite a lot of new features as well. Because frankly, everybody's busy with their roadmaps and priorities, and it always takes time, right? So from the same system, we're essentially then going to web, to mobile. We're going to all of the connected TVs, even slow ones like Tyson, and devices that have bad hardware in them. We go to Apple TV and Roku, in which case we output a format in the cloud that can be rendered through native components on those devices. So as you can see, the web technology can actually take you pretty far. And it is kind of an isolated web window we're talking about, sitting in the application, with certain communication abilities towards the player. Everything else then is essentially happening within the graphics, but it gives us a lot of freedom. If you want to do a certain baseball experience and looking like this for one customer, like that for another, just make those changes quickly, hit publish, and choose which version should be live. So even during live games, if we have bugs that come out and we want to fix them, we can actually do that during live as well, and essentially force all the users to load the new version just made available. Most customers don't want to do stuff during live, obviously, to correct things, but sometimes, it's useful to be able to do that. In this type of distribution, obviously you've done your scaling for streaming services, and it takes quite a lot to distribute video. In our case, we're not distributing any of the video. We're not adding any latency. We're not adding any really complexity on that part. We're just surfacing graphics on top of the streaming service. So this type of content, obviously, we got some massive peaks at times when we're doing content for some of the biggest broadcasters who carry content from the biggest leagues. And some of those peak moments can be really, really, really high. Multiple millions of kind of users entering into the application. You factor that out with how many you're treating at the same time, it can get pretty high. What's interesting for us is that, yes, you might have a ton of WebSockets connecting to each user. You might also have a certain portion of data that is static, so the balance of that is important. But then also, sometimes you need to be able to communicate back and forth, like a poll, where you want to ingest that data and get the response on the percentage instantly. So we have, various services here broken up so that if we need to process stuff fast, typically it's like an AWS and goes through a Kinesis type of setup, and then later we kind of store it for later use and kind of more process it. So you have to kind of, divide up your pieces of content and be able to kind of deploy that quickly. And if you do it well, you have to have some balancing checks in here, and obviously a ton of QA that you automate. Then, our uptime for many years has been really, really high. So it's always a balance to kind of strike the speed of which you can get something out, but also how you can secure that it works well. And the services you connect on top, Magnus will put AI to your list as well. There's so many services, obviously, that you could connect to, and the question is, what's the value you're generating for the users? So if we take an example of AI into the mix, what you're seeing on this screenshot here is our data workflow tool. So picture all the steps you normally would do if you're connecting to an API to get a set of sports metadata or any other piece of data. So this tool allows us to visually build that. A designer could build the entire ATP experience that we recently launched, and just by understanding a little bit of data. So it's kind of taking some of those concepts and making them into tools, so you can drag and drop and kind of visually create the entire experience that you want. So it's like a node-based tool, but at any of these points, we can take one of those boxes and say, go do an AI task. And what's interesting about that is that then you pretty much have endless of opportunities of things that you can do with this type of data set. You could also take the input as well from a service kind of upstream where we analyze the video and then giving us some pointers or tags or things that we want to react to. But we can essentially use it to connect to GPT or use Gemini or Anthropic and so on. So I'll give you a quick example of what it's being used to currently. So if we want to pick one of the models, we can do that. We can, during a live game, feed essentially the question that we want to show. And we can then go say, all right, so we'll do our workflow. We will get the play-by-play events, which is part of the stats. We want to be able to do some scripting in some of these steps. We then want to build an AI period summary. What has happened so far into the game? You're a sports expert. Tell me what was the interesting things you see in the stats so far in the game. So when you then go and automate that, and we're just running the process here now in the debug session, you get the rundown of everything that kind of ties together to be able to deliver that piece of content. So in the stream, essentially, you would then deliver an element where you decide when do you want to publish it. Is it instant? Is it timed? Should it come after a certain point of time in the game? And there you have, additional content element, which goes beyond what was possible to just ingest from the data. To be able to do interactive content like this, obviously has an impact on how much viewing duration time we're generating. That's the first step, always. Everybody's invested heavily in their platforms, and you need to be able to boost those KPIs. So that's typically where a lot of the discussion is. When you do ad stitching, everybody does that as well, but that also adds to latency. And sometimes some of the customers say it causes quality issues, and there's all sorts of challenges around it. What this is doing is not necessarily replacing the stitching, because you'll have that too, but we can build some added inventory. We can connect it to game moments, we can connect it to GAM, Google Ad Manager, and essentially we're adding 0 changes to your stream. We're just using the content to drive additional, additional moments. So if you don't want to build up some of the live stats and tie it to kind of a sponsorship setup, which is typically what they do a lot in the US, that's a good example of being able to give some value to the user, but also give some value in turn. So another example here from La Liga, which is a project we've done together with a company called Play Anywhere. We've gone in on a league level and created a graphics experience that can be then adopted by broadcasters out there. So similar to the UEFA stuff I was showing earlier, or the Euros, it's the same type of football package. It's got live stats in it, but they're also using it to kind of take the key moments. So if somebody scores a goal, you can choose, should we show it instantly, should we wait a few seconds? But in this demo, we're bringing up an advertisement just about now. And we're giving a rating as well, where the user can kind of respond to the goal. What we also did during the Euros was to take some of that data, put it back into the studio, so you can make it into a conversational piece. Oh, half the audience thought we were going to win tonight, and you can bring in that graphic again into some of the screens in the studio. The advertisement piece, I think, is particularly interesting in the sense, if you want to take a question back, the question is, how much can you generate? And how much can you generate in terms of ad moments and the number of impressions you can generate? So if you, for example, say, we're going to do 3 to 6 times, we're going to do ads during a game, well, you can say we're going to have, let's say we're going to have 10 ad positions. You can quite quickly generate, let's say we got 100,000 viewers, you can quite quickly generate in the millions of impressions just for a single game. And then you can display the ads and flip them and display another ad 30 seconds later if you wanted to, right? All without really disturbing the user too much if you do it well. So if you got a bunch of games done in a month, obviously you could generate tens and tens of millions really, really quickly, even though you don't have a massive streaming service. And for some sports, it's more restricted than others. Some sports, you can do whatever you like. Obviously, that's a piece of the puzzle. That's part of the discussion as well on the commercial side. So, but this is something that we're working quite a lot on, where we're creating new ad formats, and I think it's super interesting to be able to tap into what Google is doing with the different display ads, but to make them valuable, right? I always try to say we've got to have ads that don't, annoy the hell out of the audience, right? So, same here in terms of what we did with Service TV. We did quite a lot on the Champions League. We did voting, we did additional content, and kind of the mission was to both kind of engage the users and see how much we could boost that, but also to create a differentiator for the service. So we did quite a lot of different things that were interesting in terms of doing particularly voting, man of the match. And in this case, you could choose, should users get instant feedback, or should they get the result of the vote later into the game. So we're running a little bit out of time. We're good, Magnus? Half minute? Then I'll wrap up a little bit and say that I think where this is heading is that there's so many opportunities. What can be done? There's the impact measured year on year, 35% up on total minutes watched. And obviously, there's multiple components that go into how your streaming service develops. This is just one of them that can help boost it more. Last point here as well from Red Bull was basically to do voting on the stream on Rampage. So downhill cycling, they were voting on the stream, on the website, through QR codes in the broadcast. And all of those votes ended up in a voting pool where they could bring the result into the broadcast stream after. So they made a point at the end of the show and say, oh, the person who came in second was the person who got the most popular vote from the audience. And there's an example of a QR, right, being shown, also HTML5 graphics burnt into the stream. All right, so we will wrap up quickly. Am I following this counter, Magnus? Yeah, I'll wrap up. To wrap up in the end, I think interactive experiences are super interesting. I think there's so many different things that can be done. We don't need to be annoying to the users when we do additional content. We can do it in balanced, good ways, and we bring it across all the screens. So with that, I will leave you, and I will be here for the rest of the day if you want to discuss.